First two lectures this week we looked at nodal analysis. We've looked at all the nodes in the circuit and we're trying to find the voltages at those nodes with respect to ground, mostly using Kirchhoff's current law at the nodes. What about Kirchhoff's voltage law? Well, there's a technique that involves systematically applying Kirchhoff's voltage law, and it's called mesh analysis or loop analysis. So now we're going to consider currents in meshes rather than voltages at nodes. We're going to do Kirchhoff's voltage law around these meshes rather than Kirchhoff's current law at the nodes. So, just a reminder, a branch is a connection between two nodes. They're the elements, the resistors, the voltage sources, the dependent current sources. They are the branches or the elements. A loop is a closed path through the circuit, starts at one node, finishes back there, doesn't pass through any node twice. A mesh is a loop that does not contain any other loops. So, a thing that you couldn't have any other loop inside it. And a mesh current is a current that flows around a mesh. And we'll see that the actual current flowing through any element is a combination of mesh currents. And you can think of this just like node voltages. That's a voltage relative to ground. But if you want the actual voltage across an element, it'll be a difference between node voltages. V1 minus V2 would be the voltage on a particular resistor, for example. So mesh currents replacing node voltages in this analysis. So let's remind ourselves, each one of these elements is a branch. So that would be a branch. It's got a current source in it. That's a branch, resistor R4, and so on. A loop could be this, like that. Start there, do that. But that's not a mesh. Why? Because this is a loop inside it. That's another loop inside it. So this circuit has 4 meshes only. It might have many, or does have many, many more loops, but it just has 4 meshes. Loops without anything inside it. One there, one there, one there, and one there. And you can see IA, IB, IC, and ID are going to be the mesh currents. They're all defined as clockwise currents flowing around those meshes. So that step there, identifying the meshes and giving them all the mesh current, is like finding all the nodes and labelling them with a voltage. For mesh analysis, we want to find IA, IB, IC, and ID. They're the first things we're going to find, and then any other voltage or current in the circuit we'll be able to find in terms of those. But once we've got all the mesh currents, the rest of the analysis will be relatively straightforward. Broke that. 1 second. So, just to get a little bit of practice with these mesh currents, can we write the branch currents? So the branch currents are I1, I2, I3, I4, I5, I6, I7, and I8. Can we write all of those in terms of the mesh currents? IA, IB, IC, and ID. Well, I'm going to say that I1 is equal to IA. So in that case, this current here must be equal to IA. In melts, I want you to write down what I2 is. What is I2? Don't yell it out, do it in melts. What is I2 in terms of IA, IB, IC, and ID? A bit like me saying, it's exactly like saying, what's the voltage across this resistor in terms of the node voltages? I1 is just equal to IA. But what is I2? The current flowing down through resistor R1. I want this current here. 60 responses. All right, so 70 responses. I'll kill it. Now, oh, there we go. So IA minus IB, 77 out of 79. It's amazing how it jumps up at the end. Let's go back and see why. So IA is the current. I've got IA flowing around this mesh. That means that current there is IA. IB is flowing around this mesh, which means that current there is IB. So if you do Kirchhoff's current law at node 1 there, you can see that I2 must be IA minus IB. Think of it like, you can think of these as whirlpools. There's a whirlpool flowing around in that direction, another one flowing in that direction. So in this branch here, they're in opposite directions. And the current flow down will be IA minus IB. So I2 will be IA minus IB. We could pick another one. What's I5 going to be? Just as an example, I5 will be, well, I can see that there's an IB flowing in that direction and there's an ID flowing in that direction. So I5 will be IB minus ID. Is that okay? I've got a whole pack of Tim Tams to give away today. So this is the first step. If we don't get this, then the rest of it's going to be hard. So if I randomly pick someone, we'll find out. This is how we do it. What's I6? Negative IC. Very good. At least one person can do it. What am I talking about? 77 out of 79 of you got it right. Of course you know it. So that's good. Would you like the packet of Tim Tams? All right. Here you go. Good work. There you go. I didn't have any lunch. I got really hungry on the way here. But you do get two Tim Tams. It's better than nothing. What? Yeah, I promised the whole pack. All right. So history is important. Loop analysis was invented by Loretta de Loop. She was an Italian electrical engineer and circus performer. In fact, she was a trapeze artist. This is examinable. Please be quiet. She invented loop analysis while in the middle of a half-twisting reverse knee hang. While her circus was in Iceland, Loretta met Norbert Nadal. They instantly fell in love and were soon married by the lion tamer. So, Loretta de Loop and Norbert Nadal. What a beautiful love story. History is important. Question 7 on the exam will be about history. Because we're doing Kirchhoff's voltage law around meshes, the most obvious element to have in there is now voltage sources. So we're going to start with doing mesh analysis with a circuit with voltage sources only. Because when you're doing Kirchhoff's voltage law and you hit a voltage source, it's easy to include. You just plus or minus that voltage. If it was a current source, well, you don't know what the voltage across a current source is. But with a voltage source, we know. So this says write the loop equations for the circuit below. I'll do the left mesh. left mesh, not measle, left mesh, this one here. I'll start at A and go around the loop in this direction. So the first thing I hit is resistor R1. I could say it's V1, but I want to get everything in terms of mesh currents now. Everything I want to be in terms of I1 and I2. They're the things I'm trying to find, so I want equations in terms of I1 and I2. So what is V1 in terms of I1? I1 times R1. The current through that resistor is just I1. So I have I1, R1. Now I get to resistor R3, and I'm going in this direction. I could write V3, but I don't want to. I want to write the current through the resistor going down times R3. What is the current going down through that resistor? I1 minus I2. That's fantastic. I1 minus I2 times R3. Down the bottom, well, that's just the current I1 again, flowing through resistor R2. So it's I1 R2. Then it'll be minus VS1 because I hit the negative sign first, equals 0. That's the equation in terms of I1 and I2. That's one of them. If I simplify it or rearrange, I get R1 plus R2 plus R3 times I1 minus R3 times I2 equals VS1. And that would be my first equation. Is that okay? Yep. Good, because you're going to do, I think you're going to do the right mesh now. Oh no, I'm going to do this one, sorry. You're going to do the next one. The right mesh. What a right mesh you're in, son. Here we go. I'll start at C. And I'll go there, then there, then there, then there, around the loop in that direction. The current through resistor R4 is just I2. So I can start by writing I2 R4. The current through resistor R5 is just I2. So I can again just write I2 R5. What's the current going up through resistor R3? I2 minus I1. So I write that as plus I2 minus I1 times R3, which, if you just want to check, is minus V3. But we want everything in terms of I1 and I2. I've got VS2 to go. I go plus VS2 because I hit the plus sign first. And that equals 0. If I simplify it, that is minus R3, or just rearrange rather, minus I3R1 plus R3 plus R4 plus R5 I2 equals minus VS2. And there is the second equation. Two equations, two unknowns. We can solve for I1 and I2 and then work out any other voltage or current in the circuit. So let's put some numbers in and we'll get you to do a little bit of the work in this one. Okay, first the question says find I0, but if we find I1 and I2, what is I0? I1 minus I2, so we'll find I1 and I2 first and take the difference, and that'll be I0, the thing we're looking for. So left mesh. I'll start up here, go around clockwise direction. 6K times I1 plus 6K times the current going down through this resistor here which is I1 minus I2. I hit the negative sign first, so it's minus 12 equals 0. Rearrange 12k times I1 minus 6k I2 equals 12. Therefore, do I want to divide through by 12k? 2I1 divide through by 6k minus I2 equals 2 milliamps. 2I1 minus I2 equals 2 milliamps after we've arranged it. I hope that's okay, because your next melts is to do the right mesh. But I've got to ask the question first. 1 second. All right, open, should be open now. Do you need the laptop screen? You do? All right. Whoa. 4 different answers on there so far. Okay. You want, essentially you've got to do Kirchhoff's voltage law around this right loop here. And everything's got to be in terms of I1 and I2. Chat, help. Help each other, chat.
Oh, yeah.
Done. Everyone's done it. We ready? Let's find out. Oh, that's changing. So everyone thinks C, 3KI2 plus 3 plus 6KI2 minus I1 equals 0. I think that is correct. And 76 out of 85 people think that's too. Hey, get that over now. All right. So let's check, starting up here, going that direction. The current through resistor, 3K up the top there is I2. So it's 3K I2. I hit the 3 volt source into the positive first. So I'm adding 3, voltage drop, plus 6K times the current going up. Quiet please. 6K times the current going up through the 6K resistor, which will be I2 minus I1, and I'm done. That equals 0. You can rearrange, and you would end up with those 2 equations to solve. Bit of shush. Thank you. I'll leave you to solve those 2 equations. You can work out I1 and I2. I0 is what you had to find, and it's I1 minus I2. Again, the nodal analysis part, the mesh analysis part is getting to those 2 equations there. All right, does anyone know who that is? Don't say Grandpa. That is Jack Kilby, one of the inventors of the first integrated circuit. Invented in about 1958, and there it is. It looks like a sardine or something, but it's actually the first integrated circuit, changed the world. What's an integrated circuit? Well, they were able to put 2 transistors on a single silicon chip or wafer. So by integration means you can put 2 of them on the same chip. Before that, you might have had them in isolation. So this started being able to miniaturize things. So this was Jack Kilby, Nobel Prize for Physics in the year 2000 because of this. Let's see what it started. Oh, he looks a little bit evil to me. I don't know if you agree. That's his laugh. So here is effectively tracking this, how many transistors on a chip. This is how many transistors in a CPU. So think of how many transistors in a chip, the density of packing them in. Back down to from 1971 to 2008, and how much has it increased by? About a factor of a million times. And this is something called Moore's Law that many of you may have heard about, that roughly says the density doubles every 18 months to 2 years. So every 18 months to 2 years, that's that dashed line, and pretty much it's kept to that. The number of transistors, or the density of packing transistors onto a single chip. Starting from that very first one in 1958, which had 2 transistors on it, where you can see you're able to get 2 billion transistors in a CPU now. There's an important date missing here, which was just here, there. That is the year I was born. There you go. Very important date missing there. So that's Moore's Law. If you want to blow up some of these chips and have a closer look, take your computer apart, get a microscope and zoom in, you'll find all sorts of crazy stuff in there. This is graffiti for chip designers, tagging for chip designers, and you can see they often like to leave their little marks there. So there are some examples that you could see depending on the computer chip that you have. A Wally, a Sonic, a something and a something or other, and a someone and a thingy. Not really for me. Oh, current source. Holy moly. How do we do mesh analysis with a current source? So let's back up. It says find V0 and V1. Well, we're going to find I1 and I2. We're going to find the mesh currents. When we do, what's V0 going to be? If you know I1 and I2, V0 is what? 6K times I2. So again, it's this idea that if you get the mesh currents, you'll be able to work out other stuff that you want. First find the mesh currents, the others will follow. What's different of this compared to the last one? That's a current source, not a voltage source. So just to remember, we're going to find I1, I2, and then V0 will equal 6K times I2, etc. We can then find V1 similarly. Well, left mesh. What's the equation for the left mesh? I1 equals 2 milliamps. Okay, that wasn't so bad. I1 equals 2 milliamps. That's just like when we had a voltage source between ground and a node. You could immediately just write down the voltage of the node. Well, now if there's a current source that's only in one mesh, you can immediately write down that mesh current. Here it's only in the one mesh, so you can immediately write down I1 equals 2 milliamps. That's only one equation. You still need to do another one. And so we go to the right mesh. There's no current source in that. We can do our standard thing. I'll start there, go around like that, and get 6K I2 plus 2K times the current up through the 2K resistor, which is I2 minus I1. I hit the minus first, so that's minus 2 equals 0. Therefore, minus 2K I1 plus 8K I2 equals 2. Pretty easy to solve those simultaneous equations because you already know I1 is 2 milliamps, so you can work out that I2, by plugging it in, will be 0.75 milliamps. By just plugging that into there. So we've got I1, we've got I2. It was in fact easier because of the current source, not really harder. But we didn't have to do Kirchhoff's voltage law around one of the meshes. We already know the current. So I1 equals 2 milliamps, I2 equals 0.75 milliamps. You can then get V0. You sort of said it before. V0 was 6K times I2 equals whatever it equals. How do you get V1? V1's up there relative to ground, so V1 is this voltage here, plus, minus V1. It's the voltage on that current source. How do you suggest we get it? It's not as immediate as V0. We might have to do a little more work. But you know, what you could do Kirchhoff's voltage law, because isn't it true that minus V1 plus 4K I1, so I've gone there and there. Which loop do we want to do? Maybe I'll do this loop. Minus 2 plus V0. I've already worked V0 out. So there you go. There's an equation. I've already worked out V0. I know I1, so that I can work out V1. A little more work in that case. Maybe there's a simpler way. But basically, once you've got all the mesh currents, it's going to be pretty easy to calculate anything else. Any questions about that? No? No? No more Tim Tams coffee vouchers? All right, I'll give you, have a little bit of a break. So I don't know if some of you have seen this. It's pretty good. Drone Orchestra.
Orchestra.
I thought I was good having a final year project, which was a guitar playing a robot. But I think that beats it. All right, you know you've been waiting for it. If we have a current source that's common to two meshes now, a current source common to two meshes, we're going to need what's called a SuperMESH. It's analogous to a supernode, and it's like in nodal analysis when the voltage source was up between two other nodes. Now if the current source is common to two meshes, we're going to need a SuperMESH. All right, that was a SuperMESH. Should all get yourselves one. So two current sources in this circuit. One here, which we can handle fairly easily, but then there's that one. And it's in between two. And so you could, if you have a think about that, you couldn't easily apply Kirchhoff's voltage law in any of those meshes. You couldn't apply it in any of those meshes. What was it? Someone talking to you? Who is it? Your mum? Is it your mum? Oh, because I wouldn't mind talking to her. It'd be good. You could not. There's a current source in every mesh. So we go to apply simple KVL, it doesn't work. Because how do you write down the voltage across the current source? You don't know what it is directly. So let's see what we do. Well, I haven't even identified the meshes yet. Let's call this I1, I2, and I3. There are three meshes, so we still identify three mesh currents. Give me an equation. I1 equals 2 milliamps. There's my first one. I need 3. Give me another one. Beautiful. I2 minus I3 equals 4 milliamps. There's the one common to two meshes. Just like if there was a voltage source between two nodes, we might say V1 minus V2 equals 6 volts, or something like that. Well, here, 4 milliamps it's common to two meshes. So what would that mesh? If I said what's the current in that direction, you'd say I2 minus I3, and we know it's 4 milliamps. There's our second equation. We only need one more in terms of I1, I2, and I3. But you can't, we've already dealt with this one, you can't do a KVL around any one of them in isolation. So just like when we had a node that included two other nodes, we now need to make a mesh or a loop that includes two meshes. We want to avoid the current source. So if this was I1, this was I2, and this was I3, how can we avoid it? We want a mesh that includes this mesh and this one. So it will look like this. And we do Kirchhoff's voltage law around that. We bypass the current source. It's a mesh that includes this mesh and that one. We call it a SuperMESH. All right, take 3 minutes. Start from here, start from that point, work in that direction around that mesh, see how many terms you can get. I'm going to go out on a limb here, 2 coffee, let's have a look, start working. I've got got to get rid of them somehow. Hand up. If you're prepared to whack your hand up. Oi! He's up. Have you had your 2 Tim Tams yet? Already? Jeez. Okay, well, slow. Hang on. Not that quick. All right, we've got, starting here, 2KI2. That's that one. Yep.
Plus 2KI2 again. Up there next one.
Here?
Yep. Minus I1.
Sorry. Plus 2K what?
I2 minus I1.
I2 minus I1. So that's that. What next?
Plus 1KI3 minus I1.
1K. Has he got the direction right? Yep. I3 minus I1. Yep. Minus 6 plus 1KI3 equals 0. Well done. 10 coffee vouchers. Not all at once, please, or I'll get sued. Okay, just spread them out. Give them to your friends. So, is that all right? We just did the same thing around this bigger loop. We were able to do it because there was no current source in that path working around there. If you simplify that, you can get it down to minus 3I1 plus 4I2 plus 2I3 equals 6 milliamps. So that's your third equation, which you can couple with those two to solve for I1, I2 and I3, and then any other thing you want in the circuit. So there's the summary. You determine the number of meshes, you assign current names to them. Every current source, just give me a minute, every current source you can immediately write down an equation, and then you're going to have to do KVL around meshes or super meshes until you get enough equations. So that is mesh analysis. Here was a meme from last year. It was very topical. It was right up there in the top 3. It may have even won $100. Have a good weekend. See you on Monday.